"Dad," I shouted. "Dad, unlock the door. You've got to let me in." She will come to me, blanketed in the stars. I can't tell you how many times I have heard those words over the last decade. My father, Raymond Chandler, suffered a massive stroke and couldn't say anything else afterward. Just those 9 words over and over. Well, I guess that isn't entirely true. He said something else at the end, but I'll get to that later. Mom and Dad had worked for NASA when I was a kid. Both had completed multiple missions into space, and Mom had actually served on the International Space Station. She died there, as a matter of fact. Clara Chandler was the first person in the station's history to lose their life while stationed there. During a routine maintenance check on some of the external communication equipment, her tether came loose and she drifted into the darkness of space. I was too young to understand exactly what happened, but old enough to understand that she was never coming home. Dad did the best he could raising me as a single parent, but I don't think he ever took the time to take care of himself after she died. His hair color faded rapidly, the skin on his face creased deeply, and he rarely slept. Still, he was a loving man. "Do you think Mom was scared?" I asked one night as my father tucked me in bed. "When she floated away, was she scared?" My father smiled that sad smile I came to know all too well. His hand patted me on the head and he placed a stuffed bear next to me on my pillow. "No," he said gently, "your mother was a brave woman. Before you were born, we would sit outside each night and look at the stars. Nothing made her happier. Now she is with the stars, I think. She was very happy that she was able to stay there." Dad suffered an ischemic stroke in 2012, just 4 days before his 58th birthday. What a gift, right? He remained in a coma for nearly a month. I don't want to dredge up all of my memories of his recovery process, but I'll say this: it was rough. Most of his physicians believed he would stay in a catatonic state for the rest of his life. Regaining his ability to move independently seemed unlikely even if he did wake. Speech? That would be gone too, according to the same doctors. Day after day, I would sit at his bedside and read to him. Thriller and detective novels mostly. He was always so busy with work or taking care of me that he didn't have much time to read. That didn't stop him from picking up a hardback book and adding it to his never-ending retirement reading pile. I would pull a book from the pile every few days and read it to him. Some of the nurses said they thought he would hear it. An anchor, some of them called it. I don't know if I really believe it worked, but it helped fill the crippling silence of his sterile hospital room. After finishing up our 5th or 6th detective noir, I closed the book and sat it on the table beside him. Looking at him, I saw his chest rising and falling shallowly. His color was pale and his weight was dropping. With tears in my eyes, I took his frail hand in mine and gave it a squeeze. "Gotta head home, Dad," I whispered. "I love you." As I began to place his hand back on the white blanket, I felt his muscle tighten around my hand. He squeezed my hand back firmly. Both of his eyes opened lazily and gazed into mine. A croaking noise erupted from his throat. He was trying to talk, but his mouth was too dry. In a panic, I fumbled to the bedside table and poured him a cup of water. Holding it to his mouth, he took small sips and smacked the roof of his mouth with his tongue. A wet cough exploded, and I used a Kleenex to wipe spittle away from the corners of his mouth. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars," he said weakly. I punched the call button beside his bed to alert the nurse. "What?" I said, my heart thundering in my chest. "I couldn't understand you, Dad." He gripped my hand even more tightly and pulled me toward him. I leaned in closely, placing my ear to his mouth. Hot breath and wheezing filled my ear. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars," he said firmly. As he spoke the words, the bright fluorescent lights above the bed sizzled and burned away. After Dad got out of the hospital, I became his full-time caretaker. I had worked as a home healthcare nurse for a number of years, so the transition was pretty natural. His recovery for the most part had been incredible. All of his range of motion returned. He could walk on his own. His vision was as good as it had been before the stroke. Basic tasks like tying his shoes and getting dressed presented no issues. The only lasting effects were reduced hemiparesis, or weakness, on his right side and his inability to communicate anything other than those 9 words. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars." His doctors said it was unusual, but not unheard of. How a stroke damages the brain is different for each person. The ability to form and speak full thoughts may return. It could be weeks or years, the doctor told us, or it may never improve. It never did. My father could only rattle off that single phrase. He would say it with different voice inflections to express his mood. I didn't always understand what he wanted, but I knew if he was happy or sad. It could be incredibly frustrating, but I did my best to remain patient and understanding. For a brief time, we thought he may be able to write to communicate his thoughts, but it proved fruitless. Anytime you gave him a dry erase board or a pad of paper, he wrote those same 9 words over again. She will come to me, blanketed in the stars. Our day-to-day life was mostly normal after returning home with one exception. Dad started using chalk to draw enormous star maps on every inch of the walls. The massive designs eventually covered every available inch empty space. As he ran out of space to expand his comprehensive work, he would remove framed photos and paintings from the wall and stack them in the center of the room. When he first started, I was confused and concerned about the activity. When I saw he was drawing star maps, I don't mean he would work in one area of the house until he completed a portion. He would stare at the wall for a half hour before placing a single dot. As soon as he had finished, he would walk to another room and repeat the process. After the wall was sufficiently covered in the small white markings, I waited until he went to bed one evening and decided to clean the walls. I filled a bucket full of warm water and used a soft sponge to remove the markings. It took me hours to wash them away and return the photos and paintings to their original positions. The next morning when Dad saw them, he was furious. "She will come to me," he shouted as he stomped around the living room, gesturing toward the clean walls, blanketed in the stars. "Dad," I pleaded, "they were just little chalk dots. Let's go in the kitchen and have some breakfast, huh?" He stormed back to this bedroom and slammed the door. I could hear him crying as I knocked, but he didn't answer. He didn't come out for the rest of the day, as I recall. Just sat in his room whimpering and muttering those same 9 maddening words. As a peace offering, I drove to the store that evening while he slept and purchased him a box of chalk. It hadn't occurred to me that although his artwork on the walls didn't make sense to me, it could be very meaningful to him. It did the trick. The next morning when he came out of his room, I handed him the box of chalk. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "It's your house. If you want to draw on the walls, then that's okay." He looked down at the box in his hand and smiled. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars?" he said questioningly. "Sure, Dad," I responded, "blanketed in the stars." Over the next few years, Dad filled the walls with enormous star maps. His pace had quickened, and soon the charts bent around the corner of doors and continued into the adjacent room. Some days he would pull huge books from his office and show me photographs of the constellations and formations as he repeated those echoing words. I knew in his mind he was explaining to me in great detail which celestial bodies they represented, and I would nod along. He looked so happy, content even. But all I heard were those words. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars." 8 years after the stroke, and Dad's health was starting to take a turn. He had a more difficult time getting out of bed. Standing for a long period of time was out of the question. His memory seemed to be slipping a bit. Still, he added to his star charts and maps. That was also when the light bulbs started to burn out rapidly. Just one at first, the hallway light. I would put a fresh bulb in, and within 2 or 3 days, the filament inside would be no more than 2 charred prongs. Soon after, the light bulbs began burning out throughout the house frequently. My weekly grocery trip always included a few packs of incandescents. I told myself the old-style bulbs may be the problem, and we switched to LEDs, but it only lasted a day or 2 longer. In frustration, I had an electrician come to the house and check the wiring multiple times. They never found any issues. Everything worked just like it should, but the bulbs continued to burn out. With Dad's mobility dropping off, we started spending more time at the house. Where we used to take daily walks or travel to the planetarium, he would spend most of the day reading a book quietly in his armchair. His work on the stars grew less and less. Me, I'd spend my day in front of the television. While I was a great student, I never developed the same love for reading that my parents did. Television broke up the monotony of the quiet house. Most nights, I would fall asleep in front of the television. Sometimes I would wake up to see the glow of the TV hitting the tiny chalk dots on the wall. It almost made the little spots sparkle like the night sky, as though my father's artwork had come to life and embodied the very celestial landscape that danced above us. It was in the cascade of light from the television that I first started to see the sinister shapes. I knew it must have been my imagination, but thin lines seemed to grow between some of the stars, forming ghastly figures. Sleek, hunched, and snarling creatures made of tiny chalk dots seemed to prowl on the illuminated walls. The sounds of crackling plaster and groaning wood filled my ears. A chill would build at the base of my spine as crawled up to my neck as though I were an unwitting prey animal in the sights of an apex predator. When I would turn the lamp on beside me, the half-dream figures would vanish. Nothing left but the white field of stars. I think my father felt it too. On those nights, I would hear him call out in panic. When I would enter the room, he would be pointing madly from wall to wall and screaming those same 9 words. "She will come to me, blanketed in the stars." When he got like that, I would have to sit beside his bed until he fell asleep again. The bedside lamp would always have a burnt-out bulb, so I would change it. He would hold my hand as he drifted off. It felt so much like when I was a child when I would cry over how much I missed my mother. Dad would hold my hand in the dim lamplight then and whisper to me about how Mom was so happy among the stars. On the morning of my father's final day, I think I knew it was near the end. Most of his days he seemed to be filled with fear. He rarely slept unless I sat beside him, hand in hand. If I didn't sleep in the chair next to him, I almost always found him on the floor the next morning. He would be clutching a dwindling piece of chalk, crumpled on the floor next to the wall. For the past few weeks, he had been scrawling away at an ornate rectangle. It was beautiful and haunting all at once, like the recording of a lost loved one's voice. It looked almost like a door, though it was nearly 9 feet tall. Delicate swirls filled the space between the thick white border. Lighter shades of gray covered the inside, carefully smudged inch by my father's shaking hand. He never worked on this during the day, only during the night and only when I wasn't in the room. I had purchased a baby monitor for his room for the nights when I was able to sleep in my own bed. The first few times I saw him wobble across the floor to work on the door, I had run to the room and tried to put him back to bed. But he would become so agitated that I thought we would come to blows. No matter how many times I carried him back to bed, I'd see him again on the screen working away at the door. The rest of his room was covered in more unsettling work. What had once been a field of white chalk stars now had faint lines connecting them. They came together to form the horrific creatures I always dreamt of when I sat in front of the television. I never saw my father draw them, but they changed frequently. That morning when I entered my father's room, he was sitting in his armchair. His head was tipped back and his robe dropped open sloppily. When I first saw him, I thought he had passed away in the night. My heart ached for a moment until I saw him stir. "She will come to me," he said groggily, "blanketed in the stars." "Good morning, Dad," I said. "Breakfast is ready." We ate together in the kitchen. Well, I ate. Dad picked at his breakfast and shoveled a few mouthfuls of eggs. He hadn't been eating much and was beginning to look sickly thin. His doctor offered IV nutrition regimens, and I was sure that would be the next step. Usually we would sit on the porch after breakfast, but he got up from the table and walked on shaking legs back to his bedroom and crawled beneath the covers. For a few moments I considered trying to stir him, to take him outside for some sunlight, but he seemed so frail. I decided to let him rest. Sometime in the afternoon I must have drifted off. When I woke up, I could see the streetlights flowing in through the windows. Pulling the cord on the lamp beside me, I wasn't surprised to find the bulb was burnt out. Walking groggily to the wall, I flipped the light switch to discover it was also burnt out. I was heading toward a cupboard in the kitchen for some fresh bulbs when I heard my father scream. Rushing to his bedroom, I twisted the knob to find it locked. I began to hammer my hand on the door, calling my father's name, but he didn't answer. My ears were filled with his panic screams and the sound of things falling heavily to the floor. "Dad," I shouted. "Dad, unlock the door! You've got to let me in!" More screaming and the sound of heavy footsteps. I threw my weight against the door, but the thick wood didn't budge. The hinges would rattle slightly, but the door never gave way. Still, the sounds of terror inside persisted. My phone was still beside the recliner in the living room, so I ran back in to grab it and call 911. As I reached to pick it up, I looked at the screen of the baby monitor and my heart nearly stopped. My father sat in his bed, blankets pulled up to his chin, shivering violently. His eyes darted side to side at the walls. Glowing orbs that had once been chalk stars danced along the walls, which bulged and rippled. Something behind the walls was pushing against them and trying to break through. Abandoning my phone, I ran to the garage and tumbled down the steps, landing hard on the concrete floor. My head was swimming, but I managed to push myself back onto my feet. Darting toward the tool bench, I found my father's old hatchet and ran back to his bedroom door. Blow after blow with the hatchet rained down from above my head. Flecks of paint and chunks of wood peppered my face as I carved away at the door. Inside, I could still hear my father screaming, but now it was mingled with a guttural rumbling that filled my heart with dread. After a few moments, I was able to make a hole large enough to put my hand through. Shoving my hand inside, I swatted blindly for the door latch. The rumbling had swollen into deafening roars, completely covering my father's screams of horror. My hand found the lock and twisted it, allowing the door to swing in. I could see my father reaching toward me, eyes filled with terror. He was screaming something, but I couldn't hear him against the cracking of plaster and splintering of wooden beams. I didn't need to hear him know what he was saying. She will come to me, blanketed in the stars. Dozens of dull lights pushed themselves out of the wall and tumbled onto the floor. They rolled like bowling balls before coming to a stop. The strained sound from the walls fell silent as the orbs of light began to shake. Slowly, they began to move toward each other before forming an enormous sphere. My father and I stared in awe for a moment at the ball of light in front of us. I was about to call for Dad to come with me when the ball cracked like an egg, falling to pieces on the floor. Standing in its place was something unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was a creature made of small stars. Delicate lines danced between each of the illuminated dots, forming a nightmarish beast. Heavy claws sank into the floor as the celestial beast turned toward me. Two red orbs in the sea of white met with my eyes before the thing erupted in another guttural roar. I raised the hatchet above my head, but a cluster of brilliant white balls swung toward me and connected with my head. The hatchet dropped from my hand as I went sailing through the air, crashing against the wall by the ornate door my father had drawn. The air ejected from my lungs, leaving me struggling to draw breath. The thing turned back toward my father and lowered its stance as it began to move forward. My father screamed and thrashed in the bed as the celestial demon crept closer. It seemed to be preparing to lunge for him when suddenly the room was filled with intense light. I looked to my side and saw brilliant beams pouring from the outline of the door. The light danced and erupted throughout the delicate latticework my father had drawn. All around us, the air was filled with a sensation of serenity. Even the beast turned to look. The ornate door on the wall pushed open, flooding the room with overwhelming warmth and light. I wanted to cover my eyes, but the sight was too beautiful and I couldn't turn away. On the floor at the foot of my father's bed, the celestial abomination began to roar and writhe in pain. I looked away from the opening to see the creature melting into a pool of illumination. The waves of warmth and light from the door had driven it back to wherever it had come from, leaving the room in silence. I turned to look at the door again. A woman walked out and into the bedroom. She was so tall, nearly 8 feet. Her body was slender and agile, her smile beautiful and serene. Draped over her shoulders and falling to the floor was a silver shawl. Lights danced and sparkled over every inch, shining like stars in the night sky. Blanketed in the stars. Leaning down toward me, she placed her hand on my chest and my struggling lungs filled with air. Every ache and pain in my body faded. I felt no more fear, only love, only peace. She smiled at me and began to walk toward my father's bed. I looked toward him. He had thrown the blanket to the side and was smiling at the beautiful woman. He lifted a shaking hand toward her, and she lifted hers in return. "She has come for me," he said. "She is blanketed in the stars." The woman took my father's hand. "I've missed you, Raymond," she said in an ethereally beautiful voice. "I do believe it is time to go." "Clara," he cooed, "I knew you would come. You're as beautiful as you were in my dreams." My mother and father walked hand in hand toward the door, stopping for only a moment before me. He smiled at me as a single tear rolled down his cheek. My mother bent over and caressed my face. I put my hand over hers for just a moment as she kissed the top of my head. They passed through the door, and it sealed shut behind them. I don't know where they went, but that's okay. Wherever they are together, blanketed in the stars.